Guess what, guys? Cabin in the Sky from 1943 is the 25th film musical that we have shared with you as part of our Let's Go to the Movies at Home series. I'm really proud of that. And when we get to the next film in the series, I'm going to ask you to bring the beverage of your choice so we can toast. We would be doing that on May 27 when we get to the discussion for this movie musical, but Bob Knoll will not be with us that night. And as you know, Bob and I have co hosted almost all of these, so he's got to be at the party. So we're going to postpone it a little bit, and that's just a long and involved way of my telling you that the co-host for this intro and for the discussion on May 27 is my friend and colleague Treva Offit. You have seen and heard her at so many of our Song Is You concerts. She teaches at Laurel, and she did the intro and discussion with me on Stormy Weather not so long ago, and it was delightful to have her. The thing is, though, every time I ask her to do one of these gigs, she always says what an honor it is for her to be part of it. And I'm not going to let her get away with that this time. I'm going to beat her to the punch. And I'm going to say, Treva, it's an honor for us to have you with us in the series. And also, it's an honor for us to welcome you as a new trustee of the Musical Theater Project. How about that? So here we are. We're going to get started. And I happen to know that you like this movie musical a lot because you told me that a couple of months ago.
Thank you, Bill. You got me. And yes, I'm happy that we're showing Cabin in the Sky. It's an important film and a complex one, being one of only two movies in the 1940s that features an all black cast. Stormy Weather is the other one. And as you said, we showed it not long ago featuring the great Lena Horne. This one also co stars Lena and the phenomenal Ethel Waters. And Bill, I hate to say it, but I'm a little too young to recognize the third co star. Wink, wink.
Yeah, well, I'm not too young, unfortunately. He is Eddie Rochester Anderson. And although I wasn't around in the 1940s when he made his movies, I well remember him from the 1950s when he played Jack Benny's sidekick with the very gravelly voice. So, Treva, let's tell everybody what this movie is about because it's 80 years old now, or almost 80 years old, and I have the feeling most people don't know it at all.
Well, it's based on the novel Little Joe by Lynn Root, and then the 1940 Broadway musical that starred Ethel Waters and featured one of my idols, dancer Katherine Dunham. It's a fantasy for sure. Little Joe, played by Rochester, is a gambler, and the movie makes it appear that he's been fatally wounded in a crap game. But Ethel Waters, who plays his devoted wife, Petunia, prays for him so hard that the Lord gives him 6 months to redeem himself. And as they say in the musical, that was some of the most powerful prayer they'd heard in some time.
And this is so cool. In some wonderfully entertaining scenes, during those 6 months of Joe's, we would call it probation, the Lords General and Lucifer Jr. do battle for his soul. And Lucifer gets some help from a temptress, Georgia Brown. Who else but the gorgeous Lena Horne? Treva, there are a bunch of things I want to ask you about this film. And since you love literature so much, that's where I want to start. Because the famous playwright Elmer Rice actually wrote some words that were seen at the very beginning of the film to help prepare audiences for what they could expect. Would you do the honors?
Absolutely. Throughout the ages, powerful and inspiring thoughts have been preserved and handed down through the medium of the legend, the fable, and the fantasy. The folklore of America has origins in all lands, all races, all colors. And this story of faith and devotion springs from that source and seeks to capture those values.
You know, the word that really jumps out at me in that passage you just read is folklore. And even though this musical is based on a novel from 1938, it's always had that feeling of throughout the ages for me. So say a little bit more about folklore, if you would, because I think it's something that we've lost touch with.
Well, this especially speaks to me because I have quite a collection of folk and fairy tales from around the world. And folklore serves a purpose of explaining why things exist and how they came to be. From the coyote stories of Native Americans to Anansi of African folklore, to Brer Rabbit and Uncle Remus in the South, and the Brothers Grimm in Europe, these stories illuminate simple concepts through fanciful stories. In regard to folklore, of which she was an important historian, author Zora Neale Hurston wrote, "Now you're going to hear lies above suspicion." The struggle between good and evil is a popular tale told in countless ways. And these tales, along with playing the dozens in African American culture, help to shape many of the early themes of music, dance, and visual art.
MGM producer Arthur Freed wanted his film version of Cabin in the Sky to have real integrity as a depiction in folklore of African American culture. But from the time it was announced, there was concern about it because just a few years earlier, the NAACP and the black press had denigrated the film version of The Green Pastures for its offensive racial stereotypes.
Which meant that Cabin was controversial. But Arthur Freed was determined to produce it with a screenplay by Joseph Schrank. And he made it riskier by giving Vincent Minnelli his first crack at directing a full-length film musical. Minnelli had been a stage designer on Broadway, so his visual touches are all over the place, including the incredible tornado and its aftermath, the sudden appearance of the heavenly and hellish specters, and his decision to shoot Cabin in sepia tint. In addition, Busby Berkeley directed a few sequences, and his work on the Shine number, in addition to his travel pattern of the patrons of the club, are beautiful. And Freed wanted it to be first class all the way, with songs by Harold Arlen and Yip Harburg, and Vernon Duke and John Latouche.
But keep in mind that in 1943, Arthur Freed's unit, as it was called, his unit at MGM was not without racism, even in his well-intentioned Cabin in the Sky. When white actors refused to allow the black company to have lunch in the studio commissary, Louis B. Mayer took it upon himself to invite them to join him in his private dining room. Certainly, Cabin in the Sky was a big step forward from The Green Pastures. But now let us bring in Hall Johnson, because Johnson directed the preeminent black choir in America from the 1930s through the 1950s. That choir is featured in this film and was also in the Broadway original. They're glorious. Johnson himself thought the film was wonderful. So did the NAACP. But Treva, there's just an incredible irony here.
Oh my, yes. Hal Johnson was the master of the Negro spiritual. And there's a terrific one in Cabin called Little Black Sheep. But he wasn't asked to write it. Instead, the assignment went to Arlen and Harburg. And in fact, even though the cast was black, the writers for Cabin were all white. Granted, Ethel Waters praised Harold Arlen as the Negroest white man she had ever known, but why didn't MGM insist on authenticity? Because the studios at that time wanted to maintain their own caste system. Also, many of the original collaborators on the stage musical were white and Russian. I was stunned to learn that the original choreography on Broadway was done by none other than George Balanchine, who co-directed. Katherine Dunham was the original Georgia Brown, and one of her dancers, Archie Savage, is listed as dance assistant for the film. But there is no choreographer listed in the film credits. The featured dancers are simply listed as specialty dancer. And as you know from the Musical Theater Project, in the early 20th century, a number of Broadway musicals, like Shuffle Along, weren't just performed by blacks, but created by blacks. By the 1930s and 40s, though, that had changed.
Another example, Lena Horne's big number, Ain't It the Truth, was cut from the release print, and I want to tell you why. It's because the censors at the Hays Code found it objectionable for a black woman to be singing naked, even though she was covered in a bubble bath, for heaven's sake. Okay, so now let us jump to the 1960s, when this musical was revived off-Broadway. We are in the thick of the civil rights movement, and this is what the New York Times had to say. The climate has changed radically. A fantasy in which the Negro is treated like a simple child of nature is not so palatable as it was in the seemingly more innocent year of 1943. End quote. So, Trevor, what do you make of this musical now, almost 60 years after that stage production?
Well, a major difference between Cabin in the Sky and Stormy Weather has to do with how much more of a storyline Cabin has. And as a result, you don't jump into musical numbers, but establish the characters and conflict first. But once those numbers start, you have to be bowled over by the talent. We haven't even mentioned by name John Bubbles, the original Sportin' Life in Porgy and Bess, and Duke Ellington, and Butterfly McQueen, and Kenneth Spencer, and Rex Ingram, and Louis Armstrong, and comedians Manton Moreland and Stephen Fetchit. I mean, really. But transcending them all is the immortal Ethel Waters in her only starring role in a movie musical. Miss Waters lights up the screen with a glow from within as she sings, dances, and shows off incredible comedic timing throughout the film. You truly believe that she can pray change into being. Her signature song from the musical, Arlen Harburg's Happiness is a Thing Called Joe, is an unforgettable performance. Recently, a critic wrote, "Her voice flowed lazily out of her lips like a velvet river." By the way, she got along great with Vincent Minnelli, but as she pointed out, God is my director. Ethel Waters was a formidable spiritual and talented woman of 5'9". She rose up from an incredibly hard and isolated childhood to become a highly celebrated woman of firsts. She was the first Black female to integrate the Broadway stage, the first to star in her own television show, the first to star in a television series, Beulah, and the second to be nominated for an Academy Award for the film Pinky in 1949. Ethel worked vaudeville, performed in blackface. She sang jazz, blues, ballads, danced, toured, was a big part of the Harlem Renaissance, and worked with everyone from Bessie Smith to a young boy named Sammy Davis Jr. During her final years on the stage, she even toured with Billy Graham's Crusade. Ethel Waters fought hard for all that she had and knew the power of prayer.
And so, who better than Ethel Waters to bring to the role of Petunia her own deep spirituality on both stage and screen? Underneath all the fun, this is a serious story about morality.
Yes, in our own time of recognizing the importance of Black lives in the contributions to the multi-layered fabric of this country and others, and reclaiming the power of our own images, we can and should see all the problems with the movie. But that's not to take away from its achievement in 1943. At its core, this film has dignity, heart, magic, and incredible talent. I'm Treva Offit with the Musical Theater Project.
And I'm Bill Rodman. Thanks so much for being with us.